Hello quilt friends, welcome back to the Midnight Rose Garden Sew Along. We are back for week 8, or video number 8. This week we're going to be working on steps 33 through 35 of our pattern. And these blocks are kind of large, so again it's really hard for me to capture everything on my screen without walking around and holding my phone. So it means that our video might be a little jittery this week, but I'm going to do my best to get it to work. I'm going to take it off the tripod now and just show you. You should have several really large blocks like this, and then I'm going to walk you through how to put them together like so. So now I'm going to be walking around with the camera. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to start on step 33. And with this having a navy background, it's a little bit hard to get some of these pieces to show up. So hopefully you'll be able to see well enough. But as we begin step 33, we're going to start with this diagram here, and then we're going to sew these little sections like so to the big section that we've already made here, and then that will become this section. So when you're trying to understand the diagrams, look for these little kind of like C-type units. That shows you where we're going to be joining some of our pieces, and then these little arrows show pressing directions as we go. And so like here's step 33, you're going to do step A, then step B, then step C. So let's work on step A first. So we have one of our little flower blocks. You're going to sew this rectangle to it that we have set up, and then you have a bias triangle. So that's going to go on the end. Again, you can keep your bias to the bottom when you're sewing, and after you have all those pieces sewn together, you have this really skinny long strip that you're going to sew together to make that section. This top corner is just a solid navy triangle. It's a very long bias edge, so there's no pieces that come together that make that. It is just one bias edge. So when you go to sew that to the quilt, you're going to lay them right sides together, and again, keep the bias edge to the bottom next to the feed dogs. We did talk about this a few lessons ago, so hopefully you remember that. And then down here, let me get kind of crouched down, we are going to be sewing two big, is it E? Yes, E triangles to one of our daisy blocks. So you're going to sew one on first, then you're going to sew the other one, and then you're going to have a little overlap here that has your 1/4 inch seam. Now, like I mentioned, that's so hard to see on the navy, so try not to make you too dizzy here. But you can see it a little better on this quilt that I have going that has this tan background. So when you go to sew in your triangle, you're going to be lining it up with the edge of the block here in the middle, and then there'll be a little bit that hangs off the edge. Do you see that there? And then when you sew the two of them together, like you have here, then you're going to get this overlap where you have a 1/4 inch seam beyond the point. And you're going to need to know how to do that for all of these triangles that we're going to be sewing together for this quilt. Okay, so now I have that section laying on my cutting table, and I've taken each of these sections that we just made and I've laid them right sides together on the quilt. I've got a few pins pinning it together. I did the same thing over here, where I've got this section ready to go. And then what I wanted to show you is if when you're sewing on these big triangles, if you're having trouble with how to get that intersection lined up where all these points come together, do you remember how when we made the stem, I had you draw a 1/4 inch line, you know, from the edge of the block over a 1/4 inch line, and that line that you draw needs to intersect with this little valley. That same technique can be used for getting these triangles perfectly lined up, so that after you sew this together, you have that 1/4 inch point that I just showed in the previous video. And all of these big bias triangles are cut to size, so they should fit on there pretty close to perfect. I mean, I understand there are variations in workmanship, but if your blocks that you've been making, if they've been proofing out as you go, these triangles should fit nice. So you can go ahead and sew those sections together, and then I will prepare our little video for those next two blocks there. And by the way, this is step 33. This is rose block A. All right, now I have rose block B set up on my design wall, and we're going to do step 34. And again, I apologize for the wonkiness of this video because I am going to have to walk towards my design wall again and just, hold the camera by hand as I do this. But these blocks are large and they have such unique construction. It's just really hard to capture them in a sew-along video like this. But hopefully you have been labeling all your pieces as you cut, so this process isn't so difficult because there's lots of different, random sizes and shapes for pieces. But you're going to have to trust me in the end that all of this will come together. So let's take it a step closer, and you are going to have a rectangle here that you join to a triangle. That's going to make your first section. Then you're going to have a daisy block, some background pieces, and one of our little teal flowers. That's going to make the next little section. This is our rose block B as is. And then along the bottom, we have a 10 by 10.5 inch piece and a triangle. So make sure that you follow the directions and get that square in the pattern correctly, or get it laid out. You can refer to this diagram here. It shows you which way to lay that piece. And you can see that this triangle does not extend all the way to the edge. That is how that's supposed to be. So those are the sections you're going to make first. And then what you're going to do is you're going to sew this seam here. And once that is connected right here, then what you're going to do, let's see if I can do this with one hand without the pieces all falling down. Once that is connected, you can measure across the top of your piece and see if it is 42.5 inches. That's what it's supposed to be in a mathematically perfect world. And then you're going to take one of your strips here that's cut 2.5 inches, and you're going to trim that to length at 42.5. Now you might need to piece if your fabric is a little smaller and you pre-washed and you starched and some of those things that might cause that to shrink. But hopefully you will have enough in that length without having to piece. Then you're going to sew that to the top. Then you'll be able to add this section here, and you can add this section along the bottom and sew those all together to complete that section. Now there is going to be, a little knob here and a little knob here that sticks out. I did leave those until the end. I didn't trim. And on the previous section from step 33, that also has one. And the reason I don't have you trim, let's zoom in a little closer here, is once this is trimmed straight, you have a bias edge here that might stretch out as you're working with the piece. So that is why I have you trim later. But if you're having trouble telling where to, line this angle up, you could just draw a line along here first with, in my case, I would use a white chalk pencil or something so that that would show up, and then I know exactly where this edge needs to line up with here. But like I said, it's just easier not to trim until later. So now I will get set up for our last section for today. So give me a minute and I'll be right back. Before I go on, I just want to show you what I mean with that last comment. Here I drew a white line along here, and that way I know when I add my next piece, if I draw a line on this one too, I can see right where those intersect, and then it will be kind of the same principle that we did on this corner up here. All right, I've got step 35 laid up on our board. This one uses rose block C. So let's go in for a closer look on what our steps will need to be. So on this big setting triangle, first we have to piece a rectangle, one of our background triangles, and a flower together. You can watch the positioning of the leaf if you're concerned about that, but otherwise there aren't any tricks there. This edge is biased, so I just kept this piece on top when I sewed. Then you've got some big bias triangles. These are the B triangles. They will get sewn to either side. Again, they're cut to size, so this should fit and make the little corners that I've been talking about. Down here, we have a background rectangle and a background triangle, and our last daisy block, they will get sewn together in a row. And then we have some background strips that are 2.5 inches. This needs to be 44 inches in length. So more than likely you will have to piece it. I have a little piece up here ready to go, and I will sew those together and then cut to length. And then let me back out. And then you'll be able to sew this big long seam here together. And then you can add this piece right here. And once these two are joined here, you can add this triangle and that should all fit together. So I'm going to go do that, and then I will be back with the 3 big sections of the quilt. I have our 3 sections all sewn together now. So this is where I said that you were going to have to trust me that these would fit together, and now hopefully you can see how they will. So next week we're going to work on sewing the sections together. You know, we're going to sew this section, then we can sew the top, and then we're going to add our last corners, and we're going to do our borders. But hopefully you learned a lot in this process about setting in those bias triangles, and mainly that you learned that you can do it and get your edges to be nice and even. And I just wanted to make one comment about why I have you cut those triangles to size, because I know there are a lot of patterns where people have you, or designers will have you make your block big and then trim down, and that's great for a lot of cases. It just isn't in this pattern. And an example of that might be where, let's just say you're making a log cabin block and you want to use scraps, and so you just start sewing strips to your center square and working your way all around the block without any of those strips being pre-cut to size. And by the time you get to the end of that block, you know, who knows what size it's going to be, and it'll be different than all of your other blocks. Whereas if those strips are pre-cut to size, you know that as you're sewing them on, you make them fit as you work your way around, and then your blocks should all turn out the same size when you're done. And the same case with this, with all of these bias triangles here being pre-cut to size, you know they need to fit. So you know these edges will all be nice and smooth when they get done, and you know these sections will all fit together. This is not a project where you want to guess. This is a project where accuracy pays off, and then you're able to make a unique and more challenging quilt and do it successfully. So that was my goal with that, and that is why I have you cut all those triangles to size to begin with. So I hope you enjoyed this week where you got to see a lot of the fruits of your labor, and I will be back next week where we will finish sewing those sections together. We'll talk about borders and talk about a few finishing ideas.